Hey, and welcome to a very special X&1 interview with Mr. Will Pagani and Will Shick from AMG. Hi, guys.
Hello. Doing pretty good.
I got to be a mister, so that's great. Shick just got
Well, you're a father now, so it automatically comes with the territory.
Well, but you are too.
They give you a baby and they give you the Mister title, and that's it.
We could have gone with a Papa Pagani.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, Papa Pagani.
There you go.
The alliteration.
That's a grandchildren. That's grandchildren. Yeah.
Never tasted this man's pizza. He hasn't earned the title Papa yet.
No. Oh man. All right. Well, let's not throw too many people's pizzas under the bus here, and we'll get into talking about some design questions on how you guys go about making new units and all the fun stuff there. So I was pretty curious on when you guys are picking a new unit to create. Is it, man, this thing is cool, it needs to be in the game today, or there is a need in the game and this character fits that thematically gameplay wise? And then also I was just curious, how far up the line does it have to go to say, yeah, you can use this guy, or no, we're doing a TV show 6 months from now? And
Well, so I mean, answering the question in reverse, right? Everything goes all the way up the chain. So obviously with LFL and our partnership there, we have a weekly meeting. We present, our 5-year plan to them and what we want to cover. They provide some feedback on that. They may tell us to, think about, be like, well, maybe you should keep this area a little lighter because we might have some things to talk about at some point. Because a lot of the times we're well ahead of their production schedule. So, they're not going to give us 5 years worth of info. They may not even have 5 years of info because honestly, our timeline and what we're trying to plan for is a little longer even than, some of the movie productions or media production timelines they have. So we'll do that. And then obviously we have many touch points along the way as we get closer to the things. So there's a lot of LFL input, and they're really great partners about making sure that we're on track or making us aware if something's kind of changing, or there is somebody that we should be thinking about that maybe we've missed out on, or things like that. But largely, it's as long as they're aware of what's going on, they have some feedback on certain things, then they're pretty good about just being like, yeah, go with it. Keep these few things in mind, maybe think about this, or be aware that we're going to have an actor likeness that we want you to use for this. So, for example, when we were doing Rebel Ahsoka, for the very first Ahsoka Tano that we did for the game, that was right before they had announced the live action Ahsoka and the fact that Rosario Dawson was going to be the new character and all this stuff. So as we were discussing how we were going to approach that sculpt, because in our minds we were like, okay, well, we're going to take the Rebels, likeness, and we're going to try to reel it up because Legion is very based on kind of more of the movies, the live action kind of thing. So whenever we take an animated character and try to transfer it into Legion, it's always very challenging. People have seen that with the Bad Batch. That was a really fun kind of challenge to take on. Is, okay, these characters have only existed in animation. How are we going to make them feel like they belong, or they're pulled from a movie that doesn't exist? So utilizing Tamura Morrison's, likeness for that stuff and everything was an interesting challenge and fun to work through. With Ahsoka, it kind of went the opposite way. We were trying to, we're like, okay, we're going to do this and we think we're going to do that. And all of a sudden it was like, well, maybe you should hold off a little bit and wait because there's going to be some information that's going to be interesting. Or you could look generally in this direction as for likenesses that we think would match what a live action Ahsoka would look like. And you're like, okay.
A Rosario Dawson like.
Yeah. So that's kind of the upwards information. And then as far as, what we choose for the game, it's very much a combination of what is very cool, what isn't in the game, what do we think would be very neat to add in, what inspires us from a perspective of looking at the factions and their identities. And then, that kind of gets whittled down or focused into a more what fits with the game and where it needs to go right now. And so if we have two equally cool options, oftentimes the developers or Pagani will suggest which one will work out better. And that can be a moving target, right? We have a 5-year plan, but it doesn't mean that we're really locked into anything until 2 years, which is the overall timeline to make something. So to go from concept to actual product on the shelf is about 24 months. between all of the different approvals and all of the different, production stages and manufacturing and all that stuff. So by the time we get to that point, that's when we really have to dial in and we have to sit down as a group and say, all right, we think that this is what we want to do. Are we for sure about that? And Pagani can probably give you a little bit of an idea behind what dev themselves are looking for, because it's different for every department, right? Art and sculpt are usually looking at whatever is the most visually cool and appealing. Dev is typically looking at, okay, what fills in the gaps for the game or takes us in a direction that gets us closer to the overall identity we want for these different factions.
Yeah, he's in.
Easy interview, right? Yeah.
We have some bottom-up design and some top-down design, meaning, hey, this faction really needs XYZ. Cool. How can we get that into the game? And then we also have hey, this is really cool, so let's just do this, right? So it goes both directions in dev for sure, and it really just depends on the unit and the faction and where we're at, and are we making a battle force or something like that, right? So all that kind of stuff is taken into consideration when picking what goes in, what doesn't go in, and what things do.
Cool.
Awesome.
So kind of along those lines, when you guys design a new unit, do you guys find it's easier to work on something that has a lot of source material or something that's more obscure? So the one we were thinking about, the range trooper, it's in solo for 30 seconds and they had magnet boots.
Uh-huh.
The train heist was longer than 30 seconds. I mean, that was an awesome scene. Come on.
But they had magnet boots and they had cool fur coats. And that's about it, right? So I just didn't know if that was...
else?
Well, thankfully there was a reference book that talked about their specific blaster. That was helpful because they don't really talk about that in the movie. But yeah, I don't know. Pagani, what do you think? You might have a different answer than I do on this.
Sure. I think that honestly, to me, depends on what it is, right? Is it a operative or a commander that's getting command cards and that kind of stuff? Personally, I want more reference for that. Is it a unit like range troopers? I want less reference for that, because then we can kind of make them what we need them to be, right? We're not necessarily put in a box for those kind of things. So when it's I'm gonna say less thematic, right? Our goal is always to make things thematic, right? That's always what we're trying to do. But when we're making a unit that has to be less thematic, we're not trying to make Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? We're trying to make a guy with a blaster stuck to the side of a train. Is far less specific than Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I think it depends on what it is, I guess, is my answer. And I think also the popularity of the character is probably a big one for me personally, because if it's a super popular fan favorite character, we really got to nail the theme. We really got to nail it down. I want as much information as I can possibly get about it, as much research as I can possibly do, to make it as flavorful and fluffy as possible. Otherwise, we just get cool boots and a sweet gun and go for it.
Hey, I'm here for boots with the fur. So
absolutely,
so much fur. Yeah. So my answer to that question is it is equally difficult, because if there's not a lot of reference for it, then we have to work very closely with LFL to make sure that they're happy with what we're doing with it, which means that you don't really have a touch point, right? So for example, you say, well, we want to do range troopers and we want to do this. And then they'll say, okay, well, what are your reference touch points? What part of canon are you pulling this from? And we have to find that, or we have to have a discussion about, okay, well, this is why we want to do it. And then we get to really have some conversations with story group. Because one of the things that's, fun, but also terrifying about working with LFL is that basically everything that we do for the game from a foundational standpoint, what is a range trooper? What do they do? All of these things, that becomes part of Star Wars continuity. It becomes part of Star Wars canon. So they view all of, these game products, all of these game miniatures as being representative of Star Wars fact, right? So there's not a lot of wiggle room when you're dealing with that stuff. So when there's not a lot of info, we have the burden or the challenge of creating Star Wars approved continuity, more or less, right? And then when it's something that it has a lot of touch points, if it's got a lot, now you have to be able to identify what's really core to that character, and then make the connection as to why the way in which you want them to work in the game fits that. And so that can be challenging at certain times because, what LFL might be tuned into for a unit or a character could be a little different than your interpretation or even the community discourse or what they want to see out of it. And as Pagani points out, right, we're balancing multiple different kind of spheres in this Venn diagram to make Legion of what does a faction need? What are players excited about? What does LFL think? What do we want as developers and designers? And then, how does that add to the overall value and excitement of the game? And so you have to make all those pieces align as best you can. So really, there's no easy Star Wars thing to do, because you either have something that, has all of the data in the world, and now you have to really distill down, okay, well, what does everyone agree is the right interpretation of this character, because we only have so much room on the card. Or you have something that's like, this thing's so awesome, it appears for 30 seconds on screen. We should do it. What does it do? I don't know. Does story group know? Well, if they do, great. But if they don't, okay, now we really have to start figuring things out. And the number of awesome things in Star Wars that were just the mad invention of some prop person who had a bunch of parts on their desk and built a thing that shows up in a movie, and no one thinks twice about it, right? It's impressive. It's impressive, the amount of just bespoke stuff that runs around on screen. And then all of a sudden, once it's there, you're like, oh, well, we have to do this. Now we need to find more data, more info about it. And you start asking down the line, and everyone's like, I don't know. It's a blaster. What do you want? Well, we'd love a name. Or like, is it a common blaster? Is it a unique blaster?
Mm-hmm.
And these questions sometimes, they have to get answered for the game. So we really get to be pioneers and trailblazers in a way that's very odd and definitely it's an experience. Every day is an experience.
I didn't think about it that way, because it kind of like, if you've done so much for the Range Trooper now, so like your interpretation of it is kind of like canon going the other way now.
Yep.
And I remember back in the day, FFG made the Imperial Raider, and then it ended up being like featured in Battlefront 2. So it ended up being like way more canon than just a game.
Yeah.
So I guess that's pretty cool. You guys could make something that could, end up being.
Yeah, those opportunities are, they're not very frequent, but they are possible, and to a various level, right? On all different aspects. We have to treat every single thing that we put into the game as if it was the Imperial Raider, right? As if it was this integral part of Star Wars and always Star Wars, and it might appear all over like, you just never know. So it's a huge responsibility that is both very cool and very terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. All right. I'm gonna ask this question for a friend, not because I'm a fanboy or anything. When creating a unit that would belong to multiple factions, like Boba Fett or Ahsoka, how do you choose which faction you release them in first? Ahsoka and Boba Fett, like we've seen recently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously Boba's in Empire first, and then he came out in Rebels. I'm mainly asking Ahsoka. And then a follow-up question. I'm just going to get spicy right now. I'm just going to say it. I'm just follow-up. Are we ever going to see a Gar Ahsoka? I said it. I'm done. I can leave the interview now. You guys don't have to talk to me ever again. So that's all I want to know.
Well, we specifically released Rebel Ahsoka first for you.
Okay.
Just to be clear, like you were the deciding. We looked at all the possibilities, and we said, well, should we do Rebels first or Galactic Republic first? And everyone was like, well, that X1 Studio Mitchum guy, I think Rebels is the right call. And we said, you are correct.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
He's been painting. He has his clones in the 332nd. They all have their little Togruta markings. He's like, oh, here goes the Rebels. Gotcha.
The real answer is, part of what we're looking at. This comes back to Pagani's question on what do factions need? How can we best fill some deficiencies? And the feeling at the time was, and then there's the other part to it, which is like, what's in the cultural zeitgeist around Star Wars? What's really big? And again, we do get some inside baseball. So we knew that Rebel Ahsoka, an older version of Ahsoka, was going to become very, very present in Star Wars storytelling and in the mindset of people. And that the Mandalorian was going to carry a lot of this stuff through the different media, right? And so, well, any Ahsoka probably would have been a perfectly good Ahsoka. The decision was kind of made on both ends of the spectrum, from what does the game need to what is going to really land well in terms of just the overarching like big beats of Star Wars. That doing an older version of Ahsoka first was going to be in the best interest of all of those things involved. And so that's why, I think everyone was expecting to see Ahsoka chronologically. We first were introduced to this character as a Galactic Republic character. She obviously carried a huge amount of the Clone Wars show and has really become identified with that. But the timing of everything and where we were kind of looking at her was, but we can really strike on this next big phase of Ahsoka's career and do so in a way that I think meaningfully adds a lot to Rebels, whereas having her appear in Galactic Republic would be a lot of wish fulfillment and player like narrative, but it necessarily at the time didn't feel like that was what the Republic was missing, was another Jedi. Now we can argue, of course, all day. The Republic is missing every Jedi, and I probably would agree with you on that. But the developers have, they have a different sense. And when you really look at what the game, what each faction needs to be able to take its meta to the next level and all that stuff, it's a little different.
Yeah.
Will we see a Galactic Republic Ahsoka? I mean, I don't think I can retire until one comes out. So to be fair, right? It's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.
I'm going to circle your retirement date on my calendar now.
There you go.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Well, I see the operative slot in 501st is there. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, she did have the title of commander, which kind of fits right into a specific slot too. So we'll see where she winds up, right?
I mean, Gar's missing a lot of things, and they're pretty weak in the operative slot. Just saying. Clones are really bad right now.
I don't know if they're weak in the operative slot now.
The clones need all the help they can get right
clone
now.
Players.
Bad Batch is coming.
You have any recollection on that Ahsoka choice, Pagani? Anything to add to that? I was like 5 years ago for us. It feels like at this point.
That was a very long time ago.
Not quite that long, but it was. I mean, that conversation happened immediately upon really right around the time when we were taking stewardship and full ownership of the games.
Yeah.
And she was in the first wave, just like we showed Daimyo Boba.
This is kind of a bonus. Was that you guys' first solo unit design and release?
Boba and her and Din were actually all at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a collection of very big characters at the time. So it was definitely like head first straight into the icy drink.
Yeah.
Get it figured out. And Gideon and the Dark Troopers were also in that wave. So it was like, it was not
a heck of a start.
Yeah, it wasn't dipping your toes in. It was like, all right, go.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least you didn't release any units that impacted anything.
No.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Meta shifting units or anything. Just a couple Dark Troopers and Gideon.
Ahsoka is super cool though. I will say that. I've played against Ahsoka a lot, and I think she's super fun.
Well, it got me to buy a whole new faction so I could play her. So doing something.
Nailed
right.
it.
So,
Nailed it.
Yep. You guys got me. Hook, line, and sinker. So.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I've had another kid since then, so I don't really remember anything from that time.
The time before is just gone.
I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that wave one was really exciting and terrifying because it was our first, that we were doing just solo. And the other part that I remember, especially with the Dark Troopers, right, was this was kind of our moment to show that, the direction of the game was going to be exciting and maybe a little different, and we weren't going to be bound by playing it safe, which is, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like on the one hand, you not playing it safe, there's a little more chance of like risk where you might push things a little too far or not push them too much. And we were very new at it, but we did double the testing on everything, and we were like, this kind of is a marker for where we can build off of in the future to make sure that the game has a lot of life and a lot of excitement left to it. And there's a lot of sand left to explore in the sandbox. And we kind of knew that everyone was going to freak out about it, which also was kind of fun too, just being like, this will really blow their minds if it works. And we kind of looked at each other and went, will it work? Well, we've got 3 playtest cycles to figure it out. So that's what we did. And, I know I know it's been an interesting ride to look at some of the stuff that we've done versus some of the legacy stuff and say, well, this stuff it's so much ahead, right? And this is a Pagani line that I'm going to steal from him, but it's like, well, do you want to stick in the place that's kind of like it's fine, the water's just fine, but it's not great? Or do you want to try to get someplace where everything is feeling really great, right? And as a living iterative process, I think everyone wants everything to improve. So if that kind of comes at the level of, well, the things before are now maybe a little less exciting because the things coming out now are more exciting, but everything remains relatively balanced. To me, that's, and I think to Pagani too, right? That's the goal.
Yeah.
The goal is to innovate and explore.
I think it's also important to note very clearly, right? Like when Shick says exciting, he doesn't mean powerful, right? Like things can be exciting and not powerful, and they can be exciting and powerful, and they can be powerful and boring, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've seen that for sure in a lot of things, right? So excitement and power level are not tied together, and just we'll go into a tiny bit of studio philosophy here, right? Like we're always going to try to find exciting things because, to me anyway, when I play games and when I experience these things, that is always what I'm looking for, right? Like what is cool, what is interesting, what is exciting, what does something different. So if you look at a lot of our designs from Din and Ahsoka onward, right? Hopefully we've created exciting things that do different things than what currently exists in the game. And that's
certainly
kind of
that Am-Bam sniper rifle was another one that caught players' eyes as what is this? And that was a Pagani one too. He really dove in. It started as just a boring old weapon option that added some dice, and I know that was before Second Kid, so you probably don't remember it, but I remember it. I remember you coming in hot and being like, "This is boring. We can make this better," and throwing a bunch of options out there that we all tried, and eventually we landed on something that was very different and very exciting.
And two actions.
Actions. Yeah, the evolution from just yanking a dude outright to 2 actions to get a short move and a shot, like that was all playtesting.
Wow.
But it was because it was pretty terrible when it was 2 actions to just kill a guy. But letting him walk around and do it for 1 wasn't good either. So compromises had to be made.
Feels bad.
When it was 1 action, you could shoot and do the action for the rifle because it wasn't an attack action. Like that was a problem as well.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it landed in a good spot. It landed in a good spot.
So
It's a nice happy medium that you guys sound like. I mean, you guys went from one end to the other, and then you just met in the middle. And it seems that's like what most kind of developing philosophy would hope for. Well, and it's different, like you guys are saying. It's super exciting and new, and a whole new way to play the game.
We always had the fallback of it's a 1 to 4 or 2 to 4 rifle that shoots a couple of red dice and has critical or lethal or whatever. Take any smattering of those that you want for a disintegration rifle. So we always had a safety net, but again, this is the Mandalorian and Child. They were the biggest thing in Star Wars when we were really working on these, and LFL was way behind them. And so once more, it was like, okay, well, how do we make these exciting? How do we make people notice and to make them feel different, and to show that not everything just has to be a couple of colors of dice and a couple of keywords or 1 keyword. And that's not always true, but I think where it makes sense or where you really want to do it. Like we had never seen, Boba Fett episode 5 gets yelled at for disintegrating people. We had never seen that as a reality. And then Din comes out and he's just disintegrating everyone. Like that was I remember watching that and just being like, holy shit. This is incredible. I just took it as like Boba Fett shot people a lot. Not that he could literally disintegrate whatever he wanted to. And here's this guy just like, Jawas? Nah. They're just empty robes now.
Yeah.
That whole scene where he's just roasting Jawas and he's like trying to climb up that was awesome. So for sure.
Yeah. So it felt like it was really worth it to throw something in there that made people excited and made them question a little bit of like, what is the future of this game look like? Because I think that's, that's really what gets everyone who plays these games going, is not being able to perfectly predict what's next, right? If you can just simply say, oh, I see that on the screen and it's cool, but I know it would be, 1 black die, 1 to 3. It would have 2 white dice for white saves with surge, and these keywords, right? That's fine, but it's the unknown that really gets you going, that makes you excited for the next release. And I think it's our job, as a studio, to deliver that and to tend to say, this is what's exciting. This is the thing to get jazzed about. In addition to providing those, those stable and safe options as well.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on different versions of characters a little bit, and I kind of wanted to ask about where decisions come in on updating a card versus a brand new unit, like CIS Mall and Shadow Collective Mall are like different eras for that character. But then we've got Darth Vader and Operative Vader. They're kind of closer, and they are filling different roles in the game. So I guess, and then coming up next year, we have the hard plastic redos of a lot of the commanders and the troopers all coming. So I guess, where do you guys delineate this should be an update, this should be a brand new product to service this character in a different way? And I guess how do you guys go about sifting through that and making the right choice for the game in that aspect?
I think a lot of it has to do with there's a lot of factors, as there always are. That's what I'm learning from this interview, is we always have a lot of factors. I mean, I think part of it is the art side, right? Is this the same version of the character? Yes, great. It's the same version of the character, right? For resculpts or things like that. Is it a new version of the character? Cool. Maybe it gets a new stat card. It doesn't necessarily have to, right? And you can see that with like Operative Vader versus Commander Vader, right? Commander Vader is literally Commander Vader, right? He's the guy leading the Imperial Stormtroopers. He's out there doing those things. That's the kind of stuff. And the Operative Vader is more the Jedi Hunter, the Inquisitor, that kind of stuff going on, right? So those are two very different versions of Vader, whereas they may look almost identical. They fill very different thematic roles and things like that. And the same is true of like Luke and then Jedi Knight Luke, right? Like there's a much larger differentiation between those two because there's a whole journey, 3 movies about it.
They're pretty good.
And those are very, very different characters, right? So, and then we also have obviously the 2 Boba Fett's. Once again, giant story arc happens in between those. So it when it comes to creating new products, I think generally speaking, new products are going to get new versions of the character because we're not going to just make the same character again. But then with reprints and stuff, it's a much larger discussion that can get a little more complicated, a little more hairy. Maybe Shick wants to talk about that a little bit.
I mean, you pretty much nailed it, right? Like it's always nuanced. For example, the hard plastic resculpts, right? We're just moving existing characters into a better and brighter future to give them more detail and to move them into a superior material and all that stuff. So we're really trying to maintain what was done before, but just improve it, right? Just take it to that next level. And so therefore it's not really new characters. When it comes to like, do we update a character or do we rebalance them alongside that? That's more of a game consideration. And I don't think it's tied necessarily to products, though it can be, right? It's always a good opportunity when you're looking at a resculpt or something to go back and say, well, we have this opportunity. It's going to be this brand new thing. Should we maybe give it a second look? Or is this the time to pull the trigger on the things we've been talking about? Because as we've discussed in a couple of other places, we have basically an ever present list of things that we're looking at in terms of balance changes or updates or erratas. And we're pulling in all the data, and it's really just a gut check to say, do we have enough information to say that this change is safe or positive for the game? Because the last thing you want to do is, fire, aim, shoot, right? That's not really great. And that's what a lot of rapid reaction is. It's, well, this thing is clearly a problem, but why? Right? Our favorite question to ask is, okay, we've identified there's a problem, but what's causing the problem? Well, this thing's just too good. Well, what about it is too good? Well, it's this ability. Okay. But is it just that ability flat? Is it the fact that that ability interacts with other abilities on the card? Or is it that that ability interacts with some other special rules that are found in the other units, right? Like, what is it? What is it about it? And getting to the heart of that, the heart of that is super important, because if you just change the thing that looks like the problem, right, and it's not the problem, you can cause even further problems. And so that opportunity to kind of reset a product can be an opportunity to say, okay, let's do it. We're very confident in these changes. Let's pull the trigger. It's a great time to do it. Alternatively, you can save all that stuff and do it kind of as a bigger batch update, because every little move you make has a different effect on something else, right? So there's multiple considerations to, well, let's just change this thing, but how do those ripples affect everything else? What is the best way forward for the game to make sure that's healthy and all that stuff? And so that can also come down to, well, maybe we won't change this character, but maybe we'll make a different version and it will fill this role, or it'll fix this, this gap within things. You can do that with new products too, right? You can do that with new units and all of that, rather than adjusting an old unit that maybe isn't filling exactly what it needs to do, but it does what it does fine. Instead, you can bake in something that fills the gap that the faction needs, or that is there, that does so in a way that's balanced and well-rounded with everything else. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. So all those considerations get taken into account with that.
That's a good answer.
It's like they've done this before.
That's why they pay me the medium dollars here, just to come in with all the answers.
Oh, not the medium dollars.
Yeah, so when you guys are looking at designing units and stuff, do you guys take into the account, like, there's this objective that people just aren't playing in this faction, and it's because they don't have a unit that's effective for it right now. Like Commandos had just come out, and I feel like we're seeing a lot more Recover the Supplies get played by Commandos. Was that something you had in mind when making a unit like that, or just is it more just this is the fiction fantasy and whatever objectives it's good at is it's good at?
I mean, yes is the short answer. I don't think it's necessarily pointed directly at like Recover the Supplies and Commandos, right? But it is. Does Republic have a way to get a unit out there into the table to complete objectives that are centrally located and need these X things? No? Cool. Can we give them that? Yes. Great. How do we do that? Great. Commandos? Perfect. Fits the fiction, fits the story, fits what they're supposed to do. We got a cool thematic rule, and the priority objective token, I think it's called. Complete the mission.
Complete the mission.
Complete the mission, yeah.
You got it.
So can we do all these things and it fulfills a need that the army needs? Awesome. Let's do that. So design that up, see what we can make there, do that kind of thing. But no, I don't think it's ever like they're not very good at retrieve the supplies. Like, it's not that specific, I guess.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
I mean, I think that does come out a little bit though through playtesting, and that's part of the value of playtesting, is that you'll see a lot of player response or tester feedback that says, well, this thing kind of does this, but if we just made these little tweaks, it could do this better. And that would be great because of X, Y, or Z reasons, right?
For sure.
And that's super valuable feedback for us to be able to consider. And sometimes those little tweaks that push things in the direction, take them off brand, right? There can certainly be things where it's like, well, this thing almost does this. If you just gave it these rules, then it would do this really great and the faction would love it. And then you look at it and you say, well, but that's not Commandos, right? Like, if we gave them all lightsabers and Jedi Hunter, they'd be really great at killing other Jedi. Like, they don't do that, right? Like, maybe the Jedi Hunter thing 66, but
you can.
Yeah, you can, it kind of comes back
to detachment mechanics.
I'm a proponent of give a clone all lightsabers.
Yeah.
Put a lightsaber in the hands of every clone. We would have won the war. We would have won.
But then go back to our initial discussion of everything goes up the chain to LFL, and I don't know that Story's going to sign off on that. I had the sneaking suspicion that they're going to look at me and be like, Why do we work with you again? Please explain that to me. Like, well, how many lightsabers do you sell, LFL? A lot, I think. I just thought.
Didn't Galactic Republic also win the war? They already
Yeah.
won, right?
Well, okay.
It's
So-
complicated. It's complicated.
So, yeah,
they
so-
pivoted into a win.
They
Yeah.
they just did a little bit of Republic restructuring, and and did a little
nice quick rebrand. And then
a
here we
little
are.
rebrand, and it was new and improved. We won. Great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
I think that's the point of the Bad Batch. Yeah.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
summary. Yeah.
But so those things can happen too, right? And I think that's one of the big strengths of playtesting is that you get more outside input. You get this player, very engaged players who understand what's going on. You get faction proponents who are absolutely biased in their feedback, but as long as you can read through the bias, that's great too, because they're going to advocate really hard for that Galactic Republic Ahsoka, and I'm going to tell them no, because they don't deserve it yet. They haven't earned it.
We're doing so well. We're doing
Daddy's
so well.
love has
We
not
had
been
it.
won
We had
yet.
it.
You have to keep waiting. Try harder.
I'm gonna erase my date now. Hashtag.
So, but again, right? So those shifts do happen, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're more intentional, or sometimes they can wind up in a direction that we didn't necessarily envision at the start. But we get there through that iterative process, and I think that's part of what makes Pagani and his team so valuable, so important, is that they're able to navigate that between what is bias, what is useful, how do we make sure that stuff manages to stay flavorful and true to the setting while also be exciting and moving the game forward in good ways. And so it's a ton of data that gets processed every day to kind of move that forward. So did Commandos originally start as, like Pagani said, right? We never sat down and said, Republic needs a way to win these specific missions. We'll bake that into Commandos, right? Instead, we said, what do Commandos do? We created a design document for it. The playtesters noticed that, hey, these things are doing pretty well at this. That's great because Republic is weak here. If we can maybe adjust this, this, and this, that would be awesome. And we said that some of that works in line, some of it doesn't. And we kind of wind up in the situation of the best of both worlds, where you get something that feels like it's pulled straight out of the setting, but also fills, a deficiency within the faction that also matches their identity. And I think that's the other important trick too, right? Is that not every faction should be great at everything. And Pagani can maybe talk a bit more about faction identity and how that gets balanced, if you want to go a little bit off topic here.
Sure.
We love off topic.
I too love off-topic things. Yeah, I mean, faction identity in general, as a principle, I think is very, very, very important, right? Because that's what makes the factions different and unique. So whereas, and we can go from a very high level here, right? We don't need to get into anything specific, but like Galactic Republic gets very expensive troops that are very good. They have high quality dice. They get great saves. They get awesome support. They're a fully funded army, right? Like they should have all of these things. They get more equipment slots. They get more training slots. They get all these kind of things everywhere, right? And that's awesome. Rebels doesn't have all of that, right? They should have less training slots. They should have less equipment slots. They should have less trained troops that are less elite. They should have all of those things. Empire should be very static in how it works, right? They don't shift well. They don't pivot. They aren't very versatile. Their troops are very specialized. They're trained and equipped to do a specific thing, right? So like this is sort of the differences between these factions. And it's very important when you're making new units that you stay inside of these buckets, because when you break out of those buckets, when you break out of those buckets, it needs to be very special and unique, right? So like that's when you're talking like Bad Batch. What do they do? Cool. They get all this other cool stuff, right? Like Jedi Knight Luke, absolute unit, right? Like this guy is going to get in there and house some people. Cool. That's not a normal rebel thing, right? Like how can you break out of these things in different ways? Because that is what I think makes those things interesting and exciting inside of their own faction identity, their own bucket. So that's something that we're always looking at when we're playing, right? Because yeah, you know what? It would be awesome if Rebel Troopers had a red save and could get a bunch of surge tokens for those saves and that kind of stuff, right? Like that would be sweet, but they wouldn't be Rebels anymore. Right now it would be something else, because that's not a theme of Rebels. That doesn't make sense for them to have that kind of stuff.
Or, even the consideration of like activation count, right?
Yep.
Galactic Republic by its elite nature is going to have fewer activations because it should have less things on the table. So how do you innovate and bake and like work around that weakness? Okay, we know the Galactic Republic isn't going to have a lot of activations, but that's okay. It's both a weakness, but it can also be an interesting place to play and to find like ideas with that.
And I think Dark Troopers are a great example of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We wanted Dark Troopers to be this like hugely expensive unit. We wanted to be super duper powerful, and then we kept getting playtest feedback that was like, "Hey, I'm just getting way out activated, and these guys blow up everything that they touch, but I'm losing the game anyway, and there's nothing I can do about it because I just don't have enough guys on the table." And we're like, "Okay, cool. How do we fix that? Give them another one, right?"
Right.
So like that's kind of where that came from, right? Is that need and that feeling, right? Like when you only deploy a few units, but you have Dark Troopers, like that feeling is very different for a player than someone playing a normal, in quotation marks, sized army, right? Like it's very very different, and it's very cool to me to see that like realized on the table.
Yeah.
But you want to be careful with things like, for example, if you're looking at CIS, right? CIS should be they're just really crappy troops overall. They're cheap, they're expendable. But the reality is that they just overwhelm you with numbers, right? They just grind you down. So the last thing you want to do necessarily, because it could very much break the whole faction identity of the CIS, is to suddenly give them a really effective core choice, like a core trooper choice that suddenly is rolling, double black dice and has red saves and all this stuff. Because that, like Pagani mentioned, right, with the rebel troopers, well, that'd be great. I would take that unit over everything else every day. It's like, well, you've just completely invalidated, like you've made an Empire unit or a Clone Republic unit, right, for separatists. Well, now what's different between them? A player's choice in faction should absolutely reflect the way in which they want to play. Some players want to grind you down with pure numbers and low quality troops, but quantity over quality. Some players want to play the absolute elite, and they want to overcome the deficiencies they have in numbers with better skills, better equipment, better strategy, right? Some players want to play the Empire where it's like, when I'm working at maximum efficiency, I'm unstoppable. But if you can remove those linchpins, if you can remove those officers, if you can force me off my game, I struggle to come back because the Empire doesn't do that, right? Their troops don't have initiative. That's what makes these games so fun and enjoyable, and what puts a narrative on the tabletop, because you identify with players, right? The number one question Pagani and I both have worked in game stores. We've done, been in the industry for a long time. Whenever you're talking to a new player, the best question you can ask, if it's a meaningful choice, is, well, what personally, how do you like to play games, right? Oh, I like to be sneaky and underhanded. There should be an option for that, right? There should be a faction that says that, and that's how it plays. I like to, I always like to play the good guys, and I like to be a shining paragon with lots of defense and whatever. Okay, well, this one is going to be for you. And then you make sure that those factions really encapsulate that identity. And if you do that, you create a really interesting system where each faction is going to be slightly better against other factions, but they're going to have the tools to overcome it. That's going to require player skill, all this stuff, right? So a thriving ecosystem is not everything's the same. Everybody has access to all the same stuff. And it's just whoever pilots it better or has better dice on the day, because that's really what it'll come down to. Who gets the better rolls, right? It should be about, okay, here are the tools available for you. Who can make best use of them, given the evolving situations that are around the game? And there are a lot of variables built in for that very reason. Pagani's stroking his beard. I bet he has a thought.
Nice. Good. It's good.
Okay. Do most units that get designed get released? Or I guess the other way, Ashton, do units end up on the cutting room floor or push back?
How many units end up on the cutting room floor? But there's an absolute mess of upgrade cards and command cards on that floor, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, the worst thing that can happen to something that makes it to that 2-year mark and starts to get concepted and sculpted and all of that stuff is that it'll get pushed back for X, Y, or Z reason. It might be delayed, or it might go on the shelf for a while, but it's never truly gone. Because there's just too much effort and like just hours poured into it at any stage in the game to really say, oh, well, we'll never come back. But yes, when you're a sad little upgrade card or just rules text on a piece of paper, which is mostly what development does, at its very core, you are 100% expendable, sadly. So
many command cards.
Yeah,
so
many ideas and stuff that just
Is there like
that
a
have just
notebook
been
somewhere
lost
that you could like leave for us?
Probably.
Have you ever started with a quote and been like, all right, we got to design a command card to the quote versus making the command card and then, okay.
That's 90% of the time. That's how command card ideas get generated is find the quote or find the specific instance and then extrapolate from there. Because it's a lot easier to come up with rules from an idea rather than to just come up with rules from nowhere. Or at least that seems to be the way it works with our studio. Because we're, again, as Pagani pointed out, right? It's all about theme. It's all about narrative. It's all about replicating that experience. And rules, by their very nature, are very sterile, right? Like a rule could go anywhere. It's only once you understand, what you're trying to achieve with that rule that I think you can really find the narrative to it.
That makes a lot of
We
sense.
talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Like I said, I want characters with big backstories and not characters with as little as possible so that we can make them whenever we need them to be. And the command cards are a huge part of that, right? Is like, how can I create a thematic thing that fits Star Wars that I know is going to get approved and all this kind of stuff? It's like, oh, cool. Just take a quote, throw that in there. Great. What does the character do? Let's go, right? Like we got some ideas. There's a million different ways you can go with each of these different things. We have our starting point.
Yeah.
I love the Bad Batch card name. Like
Yeah.
it's so apt.
Yeah, it's so yeah.
What does it do? The things we do. Just more.
And I
Do it
I
all.
can't read it without picturing like in my head like Wrecker saying it. Like we do what we do. And then like
Yep.
dismantling droids. So
We're not regs. We do what we do.
man, I haven't got to play them yet, obviously because they aren't out, but they seem nutty.
I love them.
I'm just picturing me as a Republic player, so I was like, I'm only thinking about one thing. I'm like, I'm going to guidance those.
Yep.
Okay.
Strong play.
Yeah, seems good. That's a lot of points into 2 units, but yes. So what milestones do you guys need to hit with a unit before you know a unit is quote unquote ready for release?
I'm assuming you're talking developmental milestones. Right?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. So
yes.
like when
I
you're
was
making
gonna
a
say-
unit,
Having it sculpted is really good.
okay.
Having sculpts, having artwork is also pretty important.
Yeah.
Like, is it just a lot of feeling or
I mean, we have a great group of playtesters, right? So we don't necessarily require like approval from the playtesters, but we usually don't want anyone to be like screaming and running around in circles when that kind of stuff is going on, right? Because they don't necessarily have the whole picture or anything like that, right? We obviously playtest internally a lot as well, so it's sort of general consensus from playtesters, general consensus from developers internally, and then I kind of just always do like the checkbox, right? Like, is it cool? Is it fun? Is it interesting? Is it powerful? If it checks all of those checkboxes, we ship it.
Cool.
awesome.
All right.
Okay, so we have a couple digital only battle forces that have digital only units in them, HRUs, Marquand, Magnet, the experimental Magnet Guards. Is there a big difference when developing a just digital version like that versus a physical one? Do you feel like you can be more experimental because it's quite easy to make the adjustment?
The goal is always to never make adjustments. Like, let me just say that, right?
Okay.
Like, the hope is digital, not digital, whatever. The hope is to never change anything. Obviously, that doesn't happen, right? We do points updates, we do errata, we do all this kind of stuff. But the goal is always that every time we release a points update, every time we release an errata, there will never be another points update or errata. Nobody believes that to be true, but that is the goal, or at least my goal.
Sure.
Right?
Good goal.
Now, yeah. So what's sort of the difference for these digital things versus physical things? Timeline is significantly faster, right? So we can be a little more reactionary with things like this. Whereas Shick talked, hey, we get minimum 2 years production cycle. Okay, cool. Hey, man, this one faction really needs something like this. All right, we can do something digital for that, right? Like we can make a battle force. We can do this kind of thing and we can get it out in 6 months to a year instead of 2 years or more, right? So there's certainly that. And then development for it is usually much easier for the team because we are always building on something else, right? Like we're not just like for heavy response units, right? That's just a stormtrooper unit that gets 2 heavy weapons and 1 less guy. for the Magna Guard or the Persuader tank, right? Like those are very much built off of the original Magna Guard and the original Persuader tank, all that kind of stuff. So, and then we can create like a mechanic that's really interesting and weird, like the Surge token thing in the experimental droid list, or the new command cards in some of these different lists, and that kind of stuff gives us a lot of sort of flexibility that we can play with. So most of the design and development inside of those things is in those unique mechanics and not necessarily the units. The units are almost always there to answer a question that the normal thematic units that currently exist for that battle force don't answer. Cool. Or they're the point of it, like the one wound threshold Magna Guard that now you can play the whole box in one unit and that kind of stuff, right? So you get like a very different feeling of Magna Guard, or the Persuader tank that's kind of got a little node on it that is experimental and stuff. So it's very thematic reasons is usually why these battle forces get made, but they do allow us to release something much faster than to, which is still very slow.
And I really like how they kind of feature or like highlight units that necessarily weren't getting played. So like experimental droids really made BX Commando droids shine. And Absolutely. So that's cool. And then I'm playing Wookiees. So I'm, thrilled that I can just have this whole Wookiee army and just run in there. And I mean, that's something I feel like a lot of people wanted for a long time. So it's really cool that like a digital release is able to kind of fill that.
Yeah. Deal. I mean, I think the goal, right, is that we all get these big collections of miniatures and we have all these different things. But there's a lot of Star Wars that from, just a regular release cadence you can't touch, or would be complex or maybe overwhelming, right? Once you start talking about specializations in battle forces or things like that, what does it look like if I can only take Wookiees? And being able to do that within some kind of subset of rules is very useful and helpful in terms of making sure that it's balanced and fair and fun for the game. And as Pagani pointed out, right, the original idea for these battle forces having unique unit cards came from Blizzard Force. So the original intention was they never would. The original idea was we were just going to create these unique force orgs, and we were going to give them battle force cards around them, or command cards for the battle forces. That would be their special characteristics, right? Similar to how a character has their own unique command cards, and that kind of gives them a lot of their flavor and individuality. The command cards for battle forces would do the same. But what we discovered is that there's just instances where you can't effectively balance with a subset of things without introducing something new, right? The problem with the Blizzard Force was the heavy weapon choices for snowtroopers didn't cut it, right? You couldn't make a successful force because of your limit on heavy weapons. Well, we can't just snap our fingers and have 5 more heavy weapon choices for snowtroopers, right? That doesn't work within the timeline that we have, right? The goal is to make these things without making necessarily new products, because we want to support the things that already exist, that are already in people's collections. And so that's when the brainstorming started. And I think I was the one who broke the rule, because I always do. I'm the worst at that. It's like, we're not going to make new units for these things. And then we're sitting in our meeting talking about all these problems, and Pagani's relaying his woes to me. And I'm like, why don't you just make a stormtrooper unit that can take more than one heavy weapon? And to his credit, he has never come over the table at me whenever I've done that to him. But I can see it in his eyes. I can see his soul die just a little bit when he's like, you told us we couldn't. And I was like, well, I didn't know it was going to be a problem when I brought it up. I mean, come on. So
yeah, we had just done it with the Dark Troopers too, right?
Yeah. That's kind of where the idea of, because, the goal was not to, the argument was, if we put in stormtroopers, then all of a sudden you're just going to take stormtroopers. You're not going to be incentivized to take more snowtroopers, which is what Blizzard Force wants, right? It's about the snowtroopers. So you can't just put in the stormtrooper unit. It was a combination of like, well, here's the problem. Here's how we could fix it. Here's why that solution doesn't work. And so then I was just like, well, why not just give them a unit that can take multiple heavy weapons, like the Dark Troopers did? And of course, then we got the HRU, and from there, it opened up a lot, which I think was really good. And we did have a little bit of precedence to it, although it wasn't really intentional. The fact that the Shadow Collective Battle Force is the only battle force that can take Rook Cast, as kind of a unique thing. And the Super Commandos, that's kind of their unique unit in the way that the HRU or Major Marquand is for Tempest Force. But thank God we did that, because without it, it would have been really difficult to get 3 ATSTs into Tempest Force, which was kind of the whole like cool idea behind that force was that, well, what do you see on Endor? You see a lot of ATSTs. So let's really like lean into that and do it in a way that kind of worked with the org and everything else. So
yeah, Randy just lost in a tournament on stream to 3 ATSTs like last week, so he's still a little sore.
It was
so.
Why are we? This is an interview with these fine folks from A&G. I don't understand why this is coming up. Okay, anyways.
It's a therapy interview now.
yeah, straight to the source.
Okay,
Look, you can let us have it. We've heard it all before. It's fine. We'll just put it on the board for data and be like, all right, well, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. We'll watch it.
Hey, Randy, did you hear that? We made the board. We made the brainstorm board.
I'm just a loyal Shadow Collective player waiting on my mana from the heavens. It's okay. It's okay.
So just kind of a quick follow-up to the Battle Force. I mean, we kind of covered everything. Is there anything new coming down the pipes? Most factions already have 2 Battle Forces, and then you have Shadow Collective themselves, or 3. Are you trying to get to a certain point with each faction that they're going to have just these 3, or are you happy where it's at, or is there anything? I know 2025 is going to be a big year. Is there anything new coming down the pipe? Maybe
there's always new things down the pipe, right?
I was gonna, as far as Battle Forces go, sky's the limit. Honestly, like if there's a cool organization or group or thematic, tie in Star Wars, I mean, we're not going to be like, well, we only get 4. Guess, love to do a Mandalorian Battle Force, but I can't do it. Already hit 4, right? Like, want to do a Gungan Force, can't do it. Already hit 3 for like Galactic Republic, right? Like, why would you do? Why do that? Because each Battle Force, well, it is, there is a question of balancing it against each other.
Yeah.
Much like everything else, right? Again, it's an imperfectly balanced game. So some can be good, some can be bad. And by, again, it's really important when I say bad, right? We understand that bad is relative based on the overall power curve. And the goal is to keep that curve so close together that while the ends don't touch, player skill dramatically makes up for anything that's on the low end versus the high end. Mm-hmm. So if you take a player with more skill, they can defeat a player of equal or lesser skill, right? Through using low end things on the pole. That's where the balance adjustments come in, right? You can't just be like, well, X, Y, and Z unit aren't as good as, ABC unit, and be like, well, put them all together, because now you've either removed the curve and we're not playing in an interesting system because everything's mathematically the same, or you've now made ABC weaker and XYZ stronger, and you're right back to where you started. Yeah. And that, from our, I'll just say it, from our viewpoint, that's lazy design. If you're just leapfrogging yourself to make sure that the meta is different and shook up, and that people feel like, the balance is always evolving, that's not, you're just fooling people. You're just pulling a prestige.
That's
just
a very
trick,
different,
right?
That's a very different philosophy from another big game company that I know that makes a different type of game in a super fantasy future. So where they just like to take your money.
and this goes back and this goes back to Pagani's point, right? Why do we say that every points adjustment or every errata thing should be the last one we ever do? Because the goal should be that the game is stable and it's balanced enough that everything's interesting of itself. Yeah. If you go in with the mentality of, well, we'll fix it in post, you're just going to be like, should we put in that much effort? Because we'll just change it. And that's, I think that's detrimental to everything, because the last thing, the worst thing you ever want to do is have somebody, pick up the new unit, be super excited about it, put all this time painting it and putting it together and all of that. And then, 3 or 4 months later, be like, we screwed up. It's too good. I guess we'll just, we'll nerf this and we'll move this number down. And now that person's like, but it's not very good anymore. Right? That's horrible. Yeah. It's more exciting to go the other way, right? To see things increase in power. And that's what you usually want to try to do if possible, but it's not always the option. So do everything in your power to avoid both, right? Make sure that everything out of the box, everything that goes out of the office is on the correct scale and level. And then if you do get to a point to where you're like, hey, it's been many years, right? It's been many moons since the whole game came out, and everything just needs a relook. It needs a rebalance or whatever. Do that, but do it holistically. That's the dream, right? Is that you never have to go in and tweak individual things. But again, it's probably going to happen, and you always want to be a good steward of the game environment and system. But you should never assume that that's how you're going to do your job. Like, that's not your job. Your job is to make everything perfect the first time. You know,
which is unobtainable.
It absolutely.
Right? Like we make mistakes. Let me be. There will always
yeah.
These things, right? But the goal is obviously to not do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay.
That's why Pagani has no hair, because he lives in that constant struggle of, I must be perfect, but I realize I'm an imperfect being. And so every time he hands over work, and I'm like, is it perfect? And he's like, yes, but also no. And I'm like, all right, fine. It's as perfect as we think we can make it at the time, right?
Yeah. Well, I feel like you have to aim for that, because if not, you're compromising at some point. Okay, so this is the last question we have on here, but I guess if you have anything after, please feel free. Okay, what goes into deciding a weapon dice pool when it's like a similar weapon? So lightsabers, for example. Like Anakin has a lightsaber, Ahsoka has a lightsaber, Obi-Wan, Op Luke. Those are all lightsabers, but they all have very different weapon pools. So how do you, kind of break down what gets what and why?
So there's two parts to this question. There's two parts to this answer. There's one part to the question. The two parts are thematics and math. Thematics, right? How good are you at fighting, right? Because whereas the lightsaber may be the same weapon, how the person wields it and how good they are and their expertise at using those things, right, is wildly different on the outcome of how good they are at using a lightsaber. Much like a rifle, much like any other thing, right? And so this applies to everything. How well trained are you? We can go back into like the stormtroopers versus rebel troopers stuff, right? Bad example, because stormtroopers roll white dice with surges and rebel troopers roll black dice, but we don't need to get into that.
But the Empire cheaped out on their equipment. The E11 is just a substandard weapon compared to the A280. That's
what it is. I thought it was the second kid that I just forgot what Empire do. So
you're basically saying like, well, the British musket was not as accurate as the Kentucky long rifle. It's because the Kentucky long rifle was a superior rifle. It just wasn't widely available among armed forces because it was expensive and difficult to use.
All right. Well, there's the answer to you. No.
Look, I surpassed the summit of 40. I'm 41 now, so I'm getting into my historical age.
Yeah, so you're World War II buff now. Yeah.
Next thing you know, I'm going to come into the office. I'm going to be like, all right, Pagani, we're going to play some Napoleonics. Get your Russian Prussians out. Get your Corsairs. And no, you can't paint them any different than these heraldies because we're doing this specific battle.
You got to give me the paint line we're using.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%.
Oh, that's great.
No. So, right, like you're training with the weapon, how good the weapon is, all these things go into what the dice pool is. Like the thematics behind it all. So there's that side of it, right? And then there's also the math side of it, which isn't just like how many hits does it get, right? We want to do things like take the keywords into account. Do you have pierce? Do you have lethal? Do you have precise on your unit card, right? Like all that kind of stuff is all very, very important here. And then the, like, what color dice does it roll? How many of those dice is all very important to the math question that gets asked for any dice pool. So things like 6 red dice. I think Vader has 6 red dice, right? Very consistent. Very high number of hits. Doesn't require a lot of aims, right? So he can be aggressive with that lightsaber. He can move up there. He can do those things to get his hits. He doesn't have to do those things. Cool. Luke, not quite as good as Vader, gets black dice, right? So he needs more aims. He's less consistent with his dice pool, that kind of stuff. Ahsoka, same idea, right? So how good of a fighter are you plays into all these different things. And then we can also take variance into account. So, I mean, I'm going to make up some wild numbers here, right? But like the average number of hits on 30 white dice is probably roughly equivalent to 10 red dice. Those are two obscenely different dice pools in terms of variance, right?
Right.
Because the red dice pool can only roll 10 hits and / crits. The 30 white dice could go crazy and roll 30 hits, right? So like there's this whole, like, what do you want the spike potential to be? How consistent do you want it to be? Do you want these things? How do you want it to interact with other things in the army that give out aim tokens, that give out observe, right? Like all these different things. So do they surge? Do they not surge? Which is the surge part is actually a relatively easy math question. But anyways, I digress. So all of this stuff gets taken into account. And that is how you end up with dice pools. So like the Z6 rolling 6 white dice. Love it. It can roll 6 crits. It also can roll nothing because it's white dice, right? Like that's some of the most frustrating stuff in the game to me. That's the like high variance, low consistency things where it's just like sometimes you get blown out, sometimes you don't. But that existing is very good because it gives people the chance to do those things. So you can create a lot of thematics into that, right? Z6, it's got a 6 in the name. It rolls 6 dice. It's a giant chain gun. It shoots a whole bunch of dice. It's very inconsistent. I think that's all phenomenal, like combination of math and theming and player experience and player feel. So,
and this is just a me thing, and this is way off topic. I kind of like how the Z6, like if you're comparing a droid squad and a clone squad, the clone heavy is the Z6, which is a bunch of white dice, and then the droid heavy is the E5C, which is a bunch of black dice. So that kind of the pools end up being kind of similar, but it's like a different way to get to them.
Yeah, and I mean that's also a very interesting thing too, right? Like when you're making heavy weapons, the heavy weapon guy is the second to last dude to get defeated. So like your heavy weapon is very important because it is how quickly does your squad's dice pools degrade. So like the Z6 isn't super great in a degrading squad because you're losing black dice when your normal troopers die, but you're only losing white dice when the Z6 dies. So the droids kind of like, to get a little gamey in my terms here, right? They can hide their heavy weapon in a large squad so that they keep the consistency, they keep the dice power inside of that, whereas the clones have a little bit harder of a time doing that. But they're also significantly harder to defeat, so like there's that too. So all of this stuff gets taken into consideration.
And ideally, I'm fire supporting them off of Anakin Saber Throw, and I've got Surge to Crit and Pierce 3. And
exactly.
We're doing it.
And then you're just going to Value Town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Randy.
Piggybacking off that question, is there ever like the urge to like, we must add a purple 10-sided attack die now, or give us the sacred black defense die that?
There's definitely been an urge to add further variance and variability to the dice pools, but that is a forbidden fruit that will never be tasted. Just because like, if you introduced a new dice all of a sudden without like some kind of massive reset that just rebuilt everything from the ground up, you can't do it midstream, right? That has to be a foundational, like we've made this decision. Now from that foundation, everything gets built up. I can only imagine suddenly throwing in a brand new dice to either attack or defense and how it would ruin so many things. Just with like, oh, we should go back and give that to that, or now we have to account for this. And so you're kind of just, those early decisions you live with for a long, long time, potentially forever. And thankfully, despite the fact that there is no black defense dice or there is no magical D20 purple dice, there's still a lot of, as Pagani pointed out, right? There's still a lot of potential and flexibility and interesting things you can do with all the other, tools at your disposal.
I think the blood pressure just went up on Pagani there when you said D20.
Well, we're not going to get into the fact that every time he puts white dice in a dice pool.
Mace Windu, D20 purple dice?
D20 purple dice for Mace Windu? On a one, he flies out a window and dies? Sure.
Yep.
Why not?
Amazing.
Oh, man.
You make the dice out of like stone, Shick, so you can throw it out the window.
Oh, yeah. There you go. There you go.
Oh, man.
I mean, if I had my way, you wouldn't get more dice, you get less, because I would just throw out white defense dice altogether because they're pointless to me.
Oh.
Yeah,
I feel that way sometimes with Wookiees. It's like, what am I doing? I'm like wasting my time.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Anytime you've been like, well, I'm rolling all these white dice. Let me just pick up my miniatures anyway.
It doesn't matter. Pick up my guys. Yep. Might as well not even roll.
And then people are like, oh, these promo dice from Worlds are better. No, they're not. They're not.
They're prettier. They cool, feel like it's a more luxury experience that leads to the sadness, right?
Yeah, you're like,
I thought they were going to be weighted.
It's deceptive. No, you're like, oh, the World's white dice. Here, I'm going to get a save. It's like, nope.
They're all dead. White dice are just white dice. They're just cruel mistresses that love to make you sad.
Yeah.
That's it.
Doesn't matter if they have a tan or not.
And
Yeah.
I went from 501st to Wookiees, so it's been a shock.
Oof.
Because it's like I'm
Yeah,
used
but
to
you
not
got
rolling
multiple
dice.
wounds with that.
I had to roll. Didn't have to roll normally, and now when I did, it was like a surging red, and now it's like white dice, and everybody's dying.
Searching.
You got those chunky wounds, so you know.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit longer to pick up one of your Wookiees.
Yeah.
Kind of a bonus question. Do you guys have a favorite faction, favorite unit in the game that you guys really like? What factions do you guys play in the game if you have time to play?
Yeah, so I do Republic, and Bad Batch
Okay.
is my favorite unit.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Pick the new hotness. That's the right answer.
I mean, it's 2 years old for me, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Filthy clone player. That's all there is.
Hey.
Filthy clones.
I have a droid army that I did up, which was pretty fun. When I do the droids, I really like the B2s. So I built my army like it's what would probably considered not very competitive, but I enjoy it because I was just like, I'm going to take a ton of B2s. So the army that I built for that was it's a persuader tank, and then it's a bunch of B2s because I liked the idea of having them right around on their hoopty, as I call it, where they just like blast cannons as they sit on the side of the tracks.
It's a droid.
It's true. Debatable. It's their big brother. So I have that one, and I actually played that on stream once a long time ago when we were doing stream games before we moved away from that. And then I do have a clone army because I'm a big fan of the clones from a story perspective and everything. The Clone Wars is kind of my favorite. I'll always love Episode 4 the most. To me, that's the best Star Wars that's ever been made. But the Clone Wars is a close second.
I saw that poster behind your way back there of that.
Oh yeah.
Of the clone. Is that season 7 or is that?
So that's actually that's our Shatterpoint release poster.
Oh, that's the Shatterpoint one. Yeah.
And then above that, I have a really cool art piece, which is Princess Leia from Episode 4, and it's Vader, but it was done by this artist at Comic-Con, and it's wow. It's got a really strong Japanese like art flair to it. It was very colorful.
That's awesome.
And then there's a couple other pieces around that aren't on camera, but I've got quite a bit of poster artwork for all the various things that I enjoy. But yeah, so I have a clone army, and then I did an Empire army for the Slow Grow League that we did kind of at the tail end of COVID when we were taking up stewardship of the game, and we did a little like Tale of Four Gamers thing where a bunch of us in the office, Michael Plummer did a Rebel army. I think that's where you started your clone army, Pagani.
No, I did Rebels in that.
You did Rebels in that. And then I did Empire. So I did a fun like blue Empire army. Just to do something like radically different. I was like, I'm not painting white because I'd already done it with the clones. So I went way off book with that one, and I've used that a couple of times on stream. So that one's pretty fun too. But it's like Iden and dewbacks and just a crap load of stormtroopers. Again, not very good, but thematically I like it. I'm a very theme over like consistency player when I'm doing my own stuff because I just imagine the hobby project. I imagine what's cool. I build like a little narrative around it, and then I just go with it. Yeah. Because like the droid army I did, it was like Dooku's personal like droid bodyguard force. So they're all done in like Sith black with orange glow, and then the clones I did as Wolf Pack. So my entire clone force is Wolf Pack.
Very nice.
Someday I got to get a Commander Wolf and a Plo Koon.
I was going to say, you're about to say the magic words.
I know. But see, this is the thing. I can't put my personal likes first. So when it's time, I'll be very excited. But you can move them
up the list.
Little up the list.
Maybe not first.
What about my personal likes?
Oh, well, I'm always open for democracy. So the more people that ask, the higher things tick up the list.
I played Jedi Power Battles.
They personally catered to me with the Rebel Ahsoka. So obviously, Matt, they're going to cater to you with Gungans or something. I don't know.
It's whatever you want. Whatever you want.
Jedi Power Battles is definitely. That was the thing that when he had an orange yellow lightsaber.
Orange lightsaber. He was wearing like a dress, and he was really slow, but he was awesome.
He was dope.
I was like, this guy is weird, and I love it.
Yeah.
So
the Stormtrooper army I did as like a lava world, like Mustafar style. And so my argument was like the dewbacks are a different native species that resembles dewbacks, but they use those because vehicles break down because of the ash, so they have to use like living creatures. So there's no vehicles in that army. So I do weird stuff like that. Like, to me,
That's cool.
That's just always been the core of the gaming experiences. I don't mind if I lose as long as something spectacular happens on the table. And, I have to really be able to get behind the story of everything I'm doing on the table. And if I can't do that, like tournament play's fine. It's fun to go in and say, who's the better skilled person. But even when I'm doing a tournament game, I'm making sound effects and I'm, doing silly things. And if it's like, well, there's like a 1 in 20 shot that I can charge your general and, kill him, but I should really do this, I'm going for the 1 in 20 because it just tells a better story, right?
Yeah.
If I can get Dooku into Anakin and we can have a duel, I'm doing it. Like, zero question. I don't care about the outcome. I just want to live that story. That's why I play this game. So
Yeah.
To
That's
me,
awesome.
it's like it frees me of the efficiency. Although sometimes I get surprised. I take a lot of things that look cool, and then they're like, "Well, those don't work together at all," and I go, "Oh, that's fine. I'll figure it out." There's a moment where you're just like, "Oh, that's too bad. It would have been nice to not have to fight uphill for once." But
Yeah.
let's just do it, right?
Hey, I'm here for a good time, not a long time.
Exactly. I got to get
I'm
home
trying
to
to
cook dinner
remember.
on Sundays. I can't play deep into the tournaments. All right, I'm not here for late on Sundays.
Because I actually have 2 painted clone armies. One of which I started right when we took over the game, and I just built the clones list as the best of worlds that year. And I painted it, and I accidentally, because I haven't watched any of the cartoons or anything like that for Star Wars, so I accidentally painted it just entirely Bad Batch scheme, so it's like black and white and red. And then the Bad Batch show came out, I'm like, nah, I gotta repaint it all. So I just picked up a whole other clone army, and now I'm doing like this red and gray, like half scheme where the top half of the clones are red, the bottom half is like gray black. I have a lot of clones now that I'm thinking about this. Probably well over 2,000 points of painted clones.
Wow.
Sweet. That's awesome.
I thought I had a lot on my shelf over here, but I just have one shelf. I don't have a whole glass case of them back
Glass
there.
case.
Well, all mine are in the office right now because
Oh, okay.
they get used for playtest and stuff. So
Yeah.
fully painted playtest games, that's my flex.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
When your opponent puts all the little like standees that we have to replicate all of these various things, they're like, the gold ones are my stormtroopers and the blue ones are my death troopers. And this one here is my ATST, this empty base. And Pagani's like, here is my fully legal army that's been painted meticulously and has everything represented.
Yeah.
Why do you work here again? And they're like, I don't know.
Shame your coworkers.
That's right. See, the problem is that he does that, but then he has to put in the fake standees for whatever new thing he's testing. So it's like, well, it would look good, but it looks like S because of that. And he's like, I know. It doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Very
cool.
Well, this has been awesome. We loved having you guys on here. Mini extravaganzas next month, right?
Mini
July
extravaganza.
18th?
Yep. 18th, 19th, and 20th. We'll do the big shout out now. So if you're listening to this podcast, I assume that you're interested in Legion. You will not want to miss this mini strav. There's some very big news that's coming. So that's your inside spoiler that doesn't tell you anything. But I would definitely make sure that you have some time for the very first Legion stream that is going to be announced. Because I think it will be very interesting to everyone who's listening here. So there you go.
I can confirm there will not be a purple D20.
There will not be a
announced.
purple D20.
Exclusive.
Please no.
It'll be orange, and everyone will
It'll
be
be
confused. There's so many other colors than purple. I just said not a purple D20 to be specific.
Yeah.
Remember,
Please no.
the heavy response stormtrooper unit does exist. But
That's
yeah,
great.
we're gonna have a blast. We got a lot of cool things to show, but there's definitely some very big and exciting news. Culmination of the things we've been working on for over the last 3.5 years now. So it's as far as stravaganzas go, it's going to be the biggest mini stravaganza that we've had, I think, really ever in a lot of cases. So be sure to come hang out, chill, and we're going to have a blast. We got a lot of other stuff too, a lot of good content planned as well. But that first day, that very first stream. If you can only make one, make that one. It's gonna be a good one.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, Will and Will. And we'll catch you next time. X and O is
Awesome.
just a unreleased unit away.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.